1. Explore the bottom of the crisis. Song Hongbing, the author of Money War, described the horrible prospect of the subprime mortgage crisis with 4 paragraphs. Stage 1. The subprime mortgage triggered a major earthquake in the global stock market. Stage 2. The credit default crisis triggered an international financial tsunami. Stage 3. Interest rate market panic triggers the US dollar crisis. Stage 4. The global financial crisis is an ice age of decline. Currently, the default rate in the alt-a mortgage market, approximately $1 trillion, has skyrocketed from 2% 2 years ago to 10%. And the United States has also sensed credit default risk and is starting to investigate the credit default swap market, which amounts to $34.8 billion. These signs indicate that the crisis has entered its second phase. However, whether the crisis will ultimately bring misfortune to the entire United States and drag the world into the ice age requires exploring the bottom of the crisis. Firstly, the degree of economic crisis will far exceed that of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Back then, in order to fight this, the expenses of the United States in the 2 wars were $200 billion and $650 billion, respectively. At present, the United States is desperately throwing money into the financial markets, and the $850 billion bailout alone is enough for it to fight 2 wars overseas, not including other backdoor actions. Given this, subprime lending will have a significant impact on U.S. fiscal spending, as evidenced by the current record $455 billion fiscal deficit. And the heavy financial burden will be passed on like a baton to the next government to handle. And China's ability to maintain a 9.9% growth rate even when the world is almost in recession has become the envy of the world. Its strong consumer market and strong demand for resource goods have also become a lifeline to support the global economy in the face of shrinking global demand. And how can countries in crisis not look at China with a different eye? What's more, Europe and the United States have experienced unprecedented setbacks in capitalism, while the socialism with Chinese characteristics model is shining brightly. The strong contrast between the two systems has made the American model unpopular, and the irresponsible crisis handling of the United States has disappointed its followers. However, China has shown great responsibility and the Chinese model is also being emulated by all countries. It can be seen that this crisis has made it impossible for China to remain isolated, and the slowdown in economic growth in the context of the global crisis may have ceased. It can be avoided, especially a decline in exports. But the crux of the problem is not international but domestic, because the trading nation growth model of overdraft resources has hit a wall, forcing growth to shift to domestic demand. But the domestic stock market plummeted, the property market slumped, enterprises closed down, and domestic demand could not be activated in a short period of time, as evidenced by the decline of consumer confidence index for 3 consecutive quarters. In recent months, the decline in asset prices, especially the drop in oil prices below $70 and a pullback in agricultural product prices, has coincided with the economic downturn in the United States, effectively alleviating the urgent need for transformation. Transformation cannot come quickly or quickly naturally, allowing the space for adjustment and planning to focus on how to utilize this crisis. Because the impact of this crisis on Western countries is much greater than its impact on China, and the misfortunes of others are precisely possible. Leveraging, through losses, write-downs, and bankruptcies, to complete financial liquidation. In the Great Depression of 1929, about 9000 bank failure failed. During the 1986-1989 crisis, over 740 institutions were liquidated. It is expected that nearly 100 institutions will also go bankrupt in this round of crisis. According to IMF calculations, the global financial industry will lose $1.4 trillion due to this. Secondly, the impact on the physical sector is relatively small. So far, the decline of the US stock market is only about 20% to 30%, which means the crisis has not spread to other areas significantly, and the consumption foam will burst moderately. In short, this crisis broke out in the context of financial civilization and will basically digest itself in the financial field. Therefore, it is impossible to repeat the mistakes of the Great Depression under the industrial civilization of the 1930s. 2. After the storm, the United States rebuilt. Although the United States was the eye of the storm in this financial crisis, its economy has a strong ability to self-repair. Therefore, among the many drowning people, it is likely that the United States will eventually be the first to climb ashore. As for post-disaster reconstruction in the United States, it may be carried out in the following areas. Firstly, the decline in the United States is only relative, and after the crisis, it has returned to a relatively reasonable state of health. Beautiful China's economy is large and complex, and there are problems in the financial sector. Hard power such as manufacturing and military strength can dilute the destructive power of the financial crisis on the overall situation. Moreover, the financial losses of $1.4 trillion actually account for only 10% of the US GDP, and nearly half of these losses will be borne by other countries. This is the benefit of putting eggs in many baskets. Therefore, after the crisis, the runaway wild horse of excessive innovatio was put to the bridle, and the US economy only transitioned from absolute madness to relative rationality. Secondly, by redividing industries, the government will increase its regulatory weight. Mixed business has stirred up Wall Street, and subprime loans have caused. Faced with subprime retribution, the lifestyle characterized by borrowing and consumption is also facing a collapse. And the dual blow is like pouring cold water on the United States. Fortunately, crises can easily awaken people. Nowadays, Americans have started to tighten their belts and live within their means. The Eastern tradition of living within their means and advocating frugality has begun to enter the eyes of Americans, and their way of life is facing a redefinition. The growth model will also be forced to transform from crazy and unrestrained finance capitalism to a relatively rational, built-in regulatory model. Fifth, the immigration paradise will return to reality. The American universal value will converge, and the European values will rise. Every big time in the face of difficulties, the first unlucky thing is always immigration. In the crisis of the 1930s, the United States expelled more than 500,000 Mexican workers in a few years. Now immigration has become the target of public criticism. Not only the mainstream media have written articles asking, does the United States need so many immigrants, but the state governments have also explicitly or secretly ordered immigrants to leave. The open and free American values have temporarily declined, while the exclusive and closed European values are about to stir up. The intensification of opposition to immigration trend may become the last straw to crush the US hegemony. 3. China, the current savior. When the subprime mortgage crisis turned into a financial tsunami that hit the global economy, Western countries collectively injected capital to rescue the market. At the same time, they also competed to persuade China to participate in the rescue. And the former U.S. Treasury Secretary even stated that China is the key to determining the success or failure of the financial rescue plan. In fact, just as the United States was urging Congress to pass the $700 billion bailout plan, Paulson had already dispatched the Deputy Secretary of Finance to lobby China. On October 8, 2008, after global central banks coordinated interest rate cuts, McCormick once again went to Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong to lobby and visit China. At the EU summit, Sarkozy explicitly invited China to cooperate. The financial crisis in Vietnam has sparked heated discussions about aid from China, and Australia is grateful that China has helped greatly, as China's strong demand will save Australia from recession, impact and rewrite the existing global economic order. The people realize that the world is curved. And the fundamental reason is that finance has built in the original sin of evaporating and closing positions. If there is built-in, there will inevitably be foreshadowing. The so-called foreshadowing is government regulation. So redivision and strengthening regulation may become the next trend. Zhu Chen believes that since we want to innovate, we should not supervise, which is a gross violation of market fundamentalism. One illness, and the separation of industries, and strengthened regulation will lay the groundwork for the bank, insurance, and casino-based derivatives markets. Thirdly, the United States may use unconventional means to resolve the crisis. If the government's rescue fails to restore market confidence, the huge amount of money actually invested is like a cow in the sea, which has never been heard of, and has failed to ease the money supply and stabilize housing prices. Therefore, it is possible that the United States will use the killer weapon of that year again. Launch a giant project like the Manhattan Project. In the 1940s, the project lasted 3 years and cost $2 billion. And inject prosperity hormones into the American economy with the help of industry surplus and engineering surplus. Another possibility is to launch a war. According to French media, RAND Corporation has submitted an assessment report to the U.S. Ministry of Defense, believing that the effect of saving the market with $700 billion is probably not as good as launching a war. In recent times, the impatience shown by certain powerful factions and military industry groups in the United States odds the slow progress of the nuclear issue between Iran and North Korea, as well as the provocative stance of leaning aside in the Georgia-Russia conflict, have already given rise to the gunpowder of war. Fourthly, the mode of economic growth and lifestyle are facing significant transformation. Growth mode characterized by financial surplus. It is a blessing for China, similar to the Southeast Asian financial crisis that won China a decade of takeoff. 9/11 allowed the United States to turn its political focus on terrorism without considering China, all of which were opportunities for China. China's planned economy is weaker. Having learned from 70 years of experience in the Soviet Union, it was only in 30 years that we concentrated our efforts to accomplish great things, but then abandoned halfway and took the right path. This is a mirror of the planned economy of the Soviet Union. In the past, the TWO superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union competed for control over Africa, South America, and Latin America through tit for tat. Nowadays, major global poles have their own problems without strategic planning. and at the same time, they have problems. For China, how can it not be considered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? The subprime mortgage crisis has made the United States and Britain perform the initial discomfort of financial civilization, brilliantly exposing the accumulated disadvantages. Krugman and others even predict that the United States may fall into a Japanese-style long-term economic downturn. The subprime mortgage crisis in the United States has created a landmine for the financial civilization, which objectively provides a historical opportunity for China to readjust and adapt to the financial civilization. China will also look at the mirror of the United States in financial civilization. In financial innovation, China will take fewer wrong paths and pay less tuition fees, which will actually reduce the possibility of the outbreak of a series of contradictions in financial chaos, or enable China to continue to soar for a decade. Obviously, the domestic situation is not optimistic, and compared to the great opportunities of the overall strategy, it is undoubtedly small compared to big. Moreover, the current international situation is very favorable for China. Firstly, during a time of widespread crisis in the West, a large amount of capital residing on the virtual economy is likely to escape from the epicenter of the United States and sneer at the next explosive point in Europe, either hiding in safe haven tools such as gold or returning to industrial investment to find countries that have not fallen into recession or relatively stable large markets. China undoubtedly becomes the top choice. Secondly, what is currently being fought is an asymmetric war where the country does not care about the number of cards that can deter the other party, but rather whether this card is strong enough. In the past, the United States forced other countries to buy U.S. Treasury bond, and sanctions would be imposed if they did not buy them. Pakistan sought help everywhere, but China promised not to let Pakistan go bankrupt and let the whole country thank it. It returned with $500 million in loan aid and 12 cooperation agreements. The 10 ASEAN countries and China, Japan, and South Korea jointly established a US $80 billion foreign exchange reserve fund to resist regional financial risks, and 45 heads of state gathered at the Asia-Europe summit in Beijing to discuss the financial crisis. Obviously, whether it is the deceit and inducement of Western countries or the expectations of neighboring countries for China's aid, China has suddenly been endowed with the concept of salvation. The halo of master has become a highlight of global politics and economy. There are many reasons why China has received such attention. Firstly, from historical experience, China has avoided Southeast Asian finance. In 1997, the crisis showed China's strong financial resources and efficient organizational strength in the Battle of Hong Kong. Since joining the WTO in 2001, the foreign exchange reserve has increased to $1.9 trillion, which shows that China has its own set of coping with the crisis and its ability to resist risks has changed. Secondly, the subprime mortgage crisis trapped the West, and the financial system was in jeopardy. It spread from finance to commercial credit and even production. The manufacturing index fell sharply and countries in Eastern Europe, South America and other countries suffered from the threat of national bankruptcy. China has also been dragged down by the downturn in the external market. The external reserve has shrunk sharply, foreign investment has suffered losses, and export growth has declined. As a result, China's GDP growth in the first 3 quarters of 2008 dropped by 2.3 percentage points. export processing enterprises have closed down, and the subprime mortgage crisis has begun to impact China's real economy. But at present, China's financial system is stable, coupled with the adjustment of firewalls and monetary policies such as capital control. The actual impact of the external crisis on China is limited. The risk is still within a controllable range. Secondly, the crisis has ignited the camp, presenting a trend of pan-socialization and globalization. This tsunami has passed, and Europe-China found itself on the beach. In addition to the continuous collapse of financial institutions, the budget deficit of Britain in the first half of 2008 soared to the highest level after the war. In addition, according to SP, by 2010, more than 2 million families in Britain will become negative equity. As for small countries such as Iceland and Ukraine, they can no longer afford it. As the American media joked, if the American giant were submerged to the waist by floods, then the small country would have been 10 feet underwater, which has proven to be true. In addition, Japan and South Korea have also been greatly impacted, and the third quarter data in China also shows a hint of chill from subprime mortgages. In short, the United States capsized and the world fell into the water. The only difference is that some people who were not good at water drowned, some people who were swimming naked were stranded, and some people took life. Once again, the collective uprising of Western countries has led to political crises arising from the financial crisis. Since 2007, German President Kohl needled the proposal to strengthen financial regulation on the Wall Street model came in 2008, when French President Nicolas Sarkozy demanded strict punishment for the perpetrators and revealed the truth about the crisis. Suddenly, the United States realized that the once popular scene was no longer there. In September 2008, the lobbying in the United States lobbied the G7 to rescue the market, but the latter turned cold-faced. It was the old saying that politics is politics after all. There are no permanent enemies and friends, only permanent interests. At present, despite the first summit of the 15 heads of state in the Eurozone to jointly fight against the disaster, they are also forced to do nothing because the flood has already flooded their doorstep. As for the absolute leadership of the United States, at the beginning it has been greatly impacted by this crisis. Finally, the foam dominated by finance and supplemented by entities burst. A swarm of panicked financial institutions. To establish a momentum and situation is to abandon short-term interests in handling foreign relations, seek long-term strategic advantages, and use the differentiation and panic of the Western camp for forward-looking strategic positioning. Only by focusing on the future strategic direction, goals, and steps, only with the clear understanding can one operate quietly and secretly. On the one hand, China is highly likely to use building a complex multilateral relationship network as a breakthrough point to form a neutral international alliance with both small and large countries, in order to comply with international demand and enhance international influence. On the other hand, it is important to strike while the iron is hot and actively plan to make Beijing the nerve center of global affairs. On the other hand, China will inevitably pay some cost to us for taking advantage of this crisis, such as having to endure the US dollar devaluation, playing rascal, shouldering the impact of global inflation, and even slowing down the transformation of economic growth mode when making foreign plans. But these strategic costs will enhance ability to manufacture concepts and pave the way for the true rise of a major power in enhancing national credit and international discourse power. Today, China has so many foreign exchange reserves. Buying huge US bonds not only helps the United States, but also allows itself to hold a lot of bargaining chips. Although holding US dollar assets will significantly shrink, it has become a political weapon to restrain the United States, pursuing not economic effects but strategic needs. Thirdly, in the past, alliances were mainly based on geopolitics or ideology, but now the demand for economic interests is overturning the original alliance trend, and the international pattern of economic alliances will emerge in its embryonic form. The United States is deeply mired in financial quagmire, and the European Union blames the US crisis for dragging Europe down. While the UK is isolated by the EU, the United States and Britain, which were the first to enter the financial civilization, may form a financial alliance to jointly resist the discomfort of the new civilization. Moreover, nowadays, whoever has capital and consumer market support has the right to speak. The United States, Europe, Japan, and Russia are both short of money, while China is clearly in a favorable position, with no shortage of anything. In addition, Russia has helped a lot by using resources to deter other countries from complying with Russia's strategic awareness and national interests, which has led to countries in Europe, Central Asia, and other regions being too angry to speak up. His is in stark contrast to China's political non-interference in other countries' internal affairs and alliance with economic interests, making China a target for small countries to seek refuge in crises. At present, our country will mainly focus on doing our own things well and do everything possible to drive domestic growth. We need to maintain growth and believe that doing well in our own economy is our greatest contribution to the world. This is the instinctive response to mitigating the impact of external crises, but the key is to be able to utilize this crisis and contribute to the rise of major powers in diplomacy.